Hey everyone, welcome back to another video in which we're mapping out the best movies of the 2020s. Today we're gonna look at some of the movies that I think will become future cult classics. So first off, real quick, what is a cult classic? Well, in my interpretation at least, a cult classic is a movie that may not have the biggest fan base, but one that does have a very loyal one, a very strong one. Oftentimes they are movies that weren't necessarily received with the best reviews from either critics or audiences, but again they nevertheless manage to find a small and loyal fan base that keeps the movie alive into the future. In this sense, you either become part of that fan base, you become part of the cult, or you remain outside of it. And so that's what I'm gonna do in this video. I'm gonna look at some 2020s movies that I feel will become cult classics in the future, or that have already shown signs that they are building a significant cult following. And the first movie on this list is Damien Chazelle's Babylon.
That's right. There you go, buddy.
If I remember correctly, Babylon was kind of a flop when it came out. It definitely didn't do any favors to Damien Chazelle's career, unfortunately so, and in my opinion undeservedly so. But I was nevertheless fascinated by Babylon. I don't think it's quite up there with my favorites, but I nevertheless enjoyed the hell out of the sheer maximalism that this movie puts on display.
We got it.
This is basically a giant love letter to the history of classic Hollywood. It's kind of divided into these separate episodes that together form a picture or larger portrait of that classical age of Hollywood that Damien Chazelle seems to admire so much. And indeed, there are some sequences here that are truly astounding, especially the first two I think were absolutely breathtaking and wildly entertaining. The soundtrack in particular is amazing and definitely one for the ages, I think. And yeah, I just love how this movie just goes for it. You know, it doesn't compromise on its vision on any front, and that's why I think it has already gathered like quite a significant fan base, and why I think this one will continue to develop that or cultivate that fan base into the future.
Cut!
Probably the one other movie from the 2020s that is known for its maximalism is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
All those years of searching have brought me here, to this universe, to you.
Now, I enjoy this movie a lot, but I have to be honest and say that I don't think it's one that's necessarily aging very gracefully. I think this is very much a movie of its time. I think it was very much a defining movie of the 2020s, and as such I admire it a whole lot. But I think there are some aspects of this movie that feel more like a passing phase than a genuine transformation of the course of filmmaking history. And that to me is why it wasn't on the previous list that I made, but rather on this one, because I do feel this movie has a strong fan base. I mean, I know it does. It won the Oscars, it's appreciated on the internet still, and rightfully so. I think it is a movie that has a lot of heart, a lot of genuine emotion, and that I think captured something about what it means to live in our current day and age in a very meaningful way. But again, I think in some part it might be a victim of its own success, in the sense that it did spark some inspirations in other stories and other movies and TV shows that I think will eventually outlast this original in a way, if that makes sense. Or to put it like this, I think that audiences in the future will connect more strongly to movies that were inspired by Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, rather than by this movie itself. And so yeah, again, that's why I think it will become more of a cult classic in the future, you know, a movie that was very important to a particular group of people at a particular time, but one that will not necessarily live on in the general audience beyond that. And again, you know, that's totally fine. In fact, of all the movies on this list, I think this one, if we classify it as a cult classic, it will be the one that has probably the biggest cult behind it, to the point where you can argue whether or not it actually is a cult classic. But yeah, I don't want to make things too complicated, so I'm just going to leave it at that for now and move on to the next movie, which is Big.
I'm Rob. I used to live here.
I think this movie shares a lot of similarities with Everything Everywhere All at Once, in the sense that it's very much a story about the struggle for meaningful connections and to pursue like real passion and real emotions, and that isn't afraid to shed away with the irony that we've been seeing in so many movies before.
We don't get a lot of things to really care about.
I remember that before this came out, people were expecting it to be John Wick, but with Nicolas Cage and a pig. And I think because of that, it kind of misconnected with the audience at first. But luckily now it does feel like this movie has a very strong fan base. I definitely consider myself a part of it. I think this is a very heartfelt movie, a very emotional movie, and one that conveys a lot by saying very little, which is something that I just always appreciate. Up next is Another Round, starring Mads Mikkelsen.
Han mener, at mennesket er født med en halv promille for lidt.
For lidt?
Ja.
If you haven't seen it, it's about a group of men, a group of teachers who decide to test a theory that says, or that posits, that if you consume a little bit of alcohol at all times, or if your alcohol level is a little bit elevated at all times, you're basically gonna have a better time. And so, yeah, that's pretty much the basic premise of it, and it's actually a really fun movie, and also a really heartfelt one. This is really one of those movies where, when you watch it for the first time, you're kind of like, okay, that was fine, a perfectly fine 3 out of 5 star movie. But then, like, time goes by, months pass, and you kind of find yourself thinking back on this one with much more appreciation that you imagined yourself doing at first. And I'm honestly not sure why exactly that is, what makes this movie so special that it sticks with you more than other 3 out of 5 star movies that you enjoy but then end up forgetting about. But still, it did, and I think it has done so for a lot of other people, because I do see this one pop up on the internet every now and then with someone who's watched this one and was kind of surprised at how enjoyable it really is. I think maybe it has to do with the fact that at the heart of this movie, it is very much a story about friendship, about finding connection and meaning in the world around us. There is a genuine optimism here in the way it explores that kind of tension and that conflict. And yeah, I think that's just what maybe pushed this movie over the edge and turned it from just a regularly enjoyable movie into one that people are actually actively a fan of, and that again brings it into the territory of a potential future cult classic. Up next is what I can imagine will be the most controversial pick on this list, and that is M. Night Shyamalan's Trap.
This whole concert? It's a trap.
This was an undeniably divisive movie when it came out. A lot of people hated it, a lot of people thought it was silly or unrealistic and pointless. But I actually had a lot of fun with it.
Can you hold this?
I think the best way to approach this one is to kind of see it as this devilishly fun take on a Hitchcockian thriller. One that doesn't take itself too seriously and that kind of takes place in a separate movie reality where the normal rules of what makes sense and what realistic don't really apply.
I freaked out. A friend got burned.
I just really like the way it puts you into this perspective of a kind of depraved character who you shouldn't be rooting for, and yet you kind of want to go along with him and see where it goes. I think Josh Hartnett was just pitch perfect in his performance here.
This concert is crispy.
I think he was just very enjoyable to watch, very sympathetic, and I think he just did a great job at making a connection with the audience, who's then allowed for, this short period of time to allow that little inner demon to come out and play, basically. All that being said, however, I do feel like there's more layers to this movie than some give it credit for. I think there were some themes here about modern masculinity and especially modern fatherhood and kind of that feeling of being torn into two, where you have a face that you put on in front of the family and then all of the stuff that is kind of repressed to maintain that other image. Which is not to say that all men have this literal serial killer repressed inside of them, but it's metaphor. It's a symbolic representation of the kind of sacrifices you do make to become a family man or to maintain the image of a family man. And what, if anything, this movie argues for is that there is a real tension there, a real friction between those two elements that is often ignored, but that we maybe should look at a little bit more closely. Moving on to what is probably the strangest movie on this list, I Saw the TV Glow.
Is somebody there?
I think the best way to describe this one is as a modern David Lynch type fever dream.
Sirat, remember anything?
Ostensibly it's about this character who befriends another person and together they become infatuated with this weird TV show, and then at some point that friend goes missing and he kind of goes on this journey of self-discovery, or rather of self-loss in a way, which all ends up being connected to a missing episode of that TV show. And it's just a very strange movie, and I cannot claim to fully understand what is happening here, but I do get the gist of it, that it feels like a story that is about the tragedy and the pain of kind of losing yourself and not really being in touch with your own inner identity, and the way that just wears you out over time if you're not actively working to sort of resolve that issue. Obviously, there's also themes of like gender identity here, but for me, like the sort of bedrock foundation of it has to do with that kind of tragedy of living a life untrue to yourself. Or at least I think that's the kind of prime emotion that this movie captures, and which I think that everyone can relate to in some way or another.
This isn't the Midnight Realm, Maddie. It's just the suburbs.
And so yeah, that's why I think this movie is so special. I don't think this is one that's going to appeal to everyone, but that's okay, because this is the list of cult classics, and I think this is definitely where it belongs. Moving on, next up we have the Banshees of Inisherin.
Why wouldn't he answer the door to me?
Maybe he just doesn't like you no more.
Martin McDonagh, the director of this movie, has always had a very peculiar or very particular sense of humor that is very dark and not necessarily something that everyone connects with, but I've always enjoyed this a great deal. In Bruges is an absolute favorite of mine, and I think with Banshees of Inisherin, he definitely has another cult classic on his hands.
Look at this I found. A stick with a hook. What would you use it for, I wonder?
It's a very simple story, at least on the surface. We have two friends on this small Irish island, and one of them no longer wants to be friends. And that's basically the plot of it.
I just don't like you no more.
You do like me.
I don't.
Besides just being a really funny movie that really appeals to my particular sense of humor, I think it's also just a very beautifully filmed movie. And I love the way it explores themes of kindness and friendship and what it means to care for each other and to set boundaries and even to argue in a way that is constructive and that can maybe heal a relation rather than destroy one.
That sounds like the meanest thing I've ever heard. Huh?
Because, of course, what we unfortunately see happening here is the latter. We see this argument between the two friends escalate into increasing violence, and it just goes to a point where it's clearly gone too far.
I'm going to call up to your house and I'm going to set fire to it, and hopefully you'll still be inside.
I'm still not 100% sure what this movie is trying to say. There's some parallels here with the argument that was happening between the two friends on this remote small island. and the larger Irish Civil War that was raging on the mainland of Ireland, which we also see in the movie. But yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to get everything about a movie in order to appreciate and enjoy it. And Banshees of Inisherin is definitely one of those movies for me.
Do worry sometimes that I'm just entertaining myself while I stave off the inevitable.
The next movie on this list I'm not going to talk about too much, mainly because very, very few people have seen it yet. I was lucky enough to see it at the Cannes Film Festival, and it was definitely one of my favorites of the movies I saw there, and that is Sirat. So the main reason why I think this will become a cult classic specifically is because it just has a very particular vibe and atmosphere and tone to it that I don't think everyone's going to appreciate, but that some other people are going to connect with very strongly. On the surface, this is a story about a father and his son who go to the North African desert to find their missing daughter/sister, who was part of this desert rave scene but has since become missing. In the opening minutes though, one of the parties where they are searching for their missing family member is broken up by the police, and from this moment there begins a sort of odyssey deeper into the desert to this supposedly other party where she might still be at. And as this journey begins to unfold, it also becomes clear that this movie is not about the simple premise that it presented at the beginning, and that this instead is a much more mythological story about navigating a landscape where you do not know the rules of engagement and where you do not even understand the causalities that make up its reality. You know, the title Sirat refers to a bridge between death and the afterlife that spans the chasms of hell, and the bridge is supposedly as narrow and sharp as the edge of a knife, which is obviously to suggest that only a few chosen ones make it to the other side and the rest is just cast down into the pits of hell. Which I know is not the most optimistic vision, but this movie nevertheless manages to present it in a very fascinating way. Next up we have what I think is the most recent movie on this list, Danny Boyle's 28 Years Later.
Let's go get your first kill.
I'm kind of including this one in anticipation of the sequel that is arriving soon, because I do feel that with this return to his old franchise, Danny Boyle has a very specific vision of what he wants this story world to be. I think that with 28 Years Later, he already presented a very fascinating progression of the original story and really expanded on the world building in a very entertaining and interesting way.
Alpha. Fuck.
To me, that's probably what I like the most about this one. It's just the way it took that old story, it took that almost tired genre and made it refreshing, not just through content, but also through the presentation. You know, I think this movie did some interesting things with juxtaposing existing footage or footage from other movies with images from this one. I think it established a very interesting island culture with this isolated community that lives on the shore of England, I think, and that occasionally ventures into the mainland for supplies and whatnot, and where it also has to face the zombies, which now come in a variety of different flavors, so to say. I also just love the way this movie frames its whole story through the perspective of this young boy who, through his expeditions to the mainland, comes to understand a lot about the community he came from, you know, about his father, about his mother, and about the kind of tension that exists between them and which is also reflected in himself, in his own character.
You don't need to look for me. I'll come back when I'm ready.
And this is also why I'm very curious to see the continuation of this story, because it did end on that kind of strange note with the sort of Power Rangers coming down, which I'm not sure everyone was into. I wasn't sure what to think of it exactly, but I do know now that it's gonna be followed up on explicitly in the next movie, and I'm just very curious to see how this is gonna develop.
Let's be pals.
It may not be for everyone, but again, as with all the other movies on this list, I think it's going to develop a very strong following that's going to keep this movie alive into the future. Last but not least, we have Sean Baker's Red Rocket.
I'm an adult film actor. Excuse me? A porn star. I'm a porn star.
I only saw this movie for the first time very recently. When it first came out, I kind of let it go past me as it felt like it was just a sort of side project of Sean Baker, but over the years I saw so many people rave about it or kind of come back to this one and reappreciate it, which then prompted me to finally check it out as well. And I should have done this the moment it came out because I absolutely enjoyed it and it just became an instant favorite of mine.
Yeah, I'm back in town. It's so good to see you again, man. You look great. Hey, I'm Mikey.
My daughter, June.
I just love the way this movie presents such a troubled and really like an unsympathetic protagonist and then still manages to create a connection with the audience, or at least, you know, you feel some empathy for him, even when you think he's kind of an asshole, you know?
Anyway, don't say shit. That stays between us.
I got you, brother.
All right, you got the next set.
But in doing so, I do feel like the movie is very good at achieving a specific perspective, which is something that Sean Baker has done in the past very well. And the way it just kind of explores these troubled margins of society where nobody really is morally perfect or morally pure, and people are just trying to get by in ways that are honorable and in ways that are less so.
Top of the morning to you.
Good morning, sir. What can I grab you?
It's Mikey, not sir. I'm not that old.
And yeah, it's just also a very entertaining movie, a very funny movie. But more than anything, it is one that has real heart and that really explores its subject, as troubling as it can be, with real warmth and without judgment. And that's something I just really appreciate and think we should see more of. And so yeah, I can definitely see now why this one has been gathering such a strong, loyal fan base, and I'm sure it will continue to do so in the years to come.
Okay. We're good? You understand.
And with that, we've reached the end of this second list of 2020's movies that I think will live on into the future. I hope you all enjoyed this one. I do think we got some interesting movies here. You know, with the previous list, I felt like we had to establish that sort of foundational category, even if that was the somewhat more boring list in a way. You know, the one that just doesn't have that many surprises. But yeah, I think with this one, we're now able to kind of expand on what was established before and explore those different categories where we do find some more interesting choices and maybe some more surprising movies. And we're not done yet, because in the next video I'm gonna look at some 2020's movies that I think will end up as hidden gems. These are really gonna be movies that very few people have seen, but which nevertheless will end up enduring as these cinematic diamonds that will be uncovered from time to time by people who will somehow find their way to it and then just really appreciate them and kind of revive them. So yeah, that's up next, and after that we're also gonna look at some blockbuster favorites, so there's a lot more coming, so be sure to stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments which movies you would have included in this category or which ones you would include in the upcoming ones. I look forward to seeing your suggestions. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.